What I'm going to talk about now is a project, one of our biggest projects actually. So the Better Start National Science Challenge is one of the 11 science challenges funded through NBIE. They're all coming to an end, I think, in 2024. This one is certainly anyway. It's been running since 2016, and we've been involved since the beginning, complementing the sort of substantive themes, as they'll call them, as I'll get onto shortly, with some big data work. So by big data, we mostly mean whole population data, not in a big data Facebook kind of sense. Okay, yes. So three main themes of the Better Start National Science Challenge. Things that we're interested in are Better Start, so that covers the early part of life from 0 to 24. Interested in healthy weight for children and adolescents, resiliency, mental resiliency in adolescence, and successful learning and literacy, especially early on. And what our role is, so this is, I lead the big data team at Better Start, and that's myself and a couple other people, Compass and Sri Gibb at Otago Wellington, and Barry Taylor and Lisa Daniels and Nick Bowden and Jesse Kokoa at University of Otago in Dunedin. So we support these three themes in their work by working with them to work out the questions that they want answered, that can be answered with whole population data. Typically, that's the IDI, which you've heard a lot about today, but not always the IDI, as I'll get on to. We don't need that, except to say this is a disclaimer. I'm going to produce some results that we produce in the IDI, so that's why the disclaimer's there. Okay, so in terms of, and so what I'm going to do is go through things that we've done recently along these three areas and what we're going to do next. So in terms of healthy weight, Nicholas Shackleton, who worked with Compass up until very recently and with Better Start until very recently, wrote a paper that looked at trends in healthy weight from 2011 to 2016 and showed downward trajectories of obesity in preschool children, so age 4 children, using the before school check. And I'm going to the second one first here. And so what we've done recently is done an extension of that paper and showed that those trends in preschool obesity are continuing their downward trend. And I'll show you that shortly, all the way through to 2019. There's been talk about what's happened through COVID, and that's a very interesting question, and one that's I think going to be slightly difficult to answer, because COVID just screwed with everything, including the collection of data, such as from the before school check. It was stopped for a time, for instance. But it's a reasonable question. And some of the New Zealand Health Survey is addressed as well. Without, I think, coming up with solid conclusions about what's happened with weight, certainly. And I'll get on to a little bit about mental health. And then also something that Lisa Daniels is leading is looking at early growth, the growth in children in the first sort of 3 years of life, using Plunkett data. So we're one of the, I think, inaugural outside group to use Plunkett data for research as opposed to just for their operations. And so this is from that work, and this is a paper that's under review at Pediatric Obesity, led by Lisa Daniels, looking at the extent of those who are underweight along the top 3 panels and those who meet criteria for overweight, using the WHO standards for both. And you may or may not be able to see there, but it's got 6 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, 10 months, 16.5 months, and 27 months. And what you kind of see there, especially if you look at the bottom, is the extent to which unhealthy weight, if you like, starts to kick off. And New Zealand has high rates of this, even though it's going down. Really seems to be between the 12 weeks and the 6-month part. And you're seeing pretty much the same results for every ethnic group. They're showing the same patterns. One possible reason for that I think Lisa would argue is the introduction of solids. It's at that point where you really see this starting to kick off. So up until that point, you're getting a lot of breast and bottle feeding up until the 12-week, and so it changes between 12 and 6 months for a lot of children. And then the second thing, so this is the follow-up paper I was talking about, showing further reductions in the prevalence of obesity in 4-year-old children from 2017 to 2019. So we looked all the way through, but the bit that we added on was from 2017 to 2019. So 4-year-old children, again, that's in the before school check, which is a health and wellbeing check done on children at age 4. Typically, they're between 48 to 54 months, but some after 54 months. And we've looked at trends in obesity there. And as you can see, overall, by gender, by area deprivation, and by ethnicity, going down for every single group. If anything, we're seeing reducing inequalities. If you look at the spread across deprivation, across ethnicity on the bottom two panels there. So this is a good news story, I think, in New Zealand. What's less known, and this is one aspect of data collection or the IDI, I suppose, is what's less known is what happens after that. We're not seeing those sorts of trends when you look at New Zealand Health Survey data, when you look at children who are slightly older. The only time you get a measurement, more or less, of the whole country of obesity or BMI is at age 4, not thereafter. And so if we believe this is happening, and we believe the New Zealand Health Survey, which we've no reason to not believe, then something is happening between preschool and school that means that these downward trends don't seem to be continuing on through school with obesity. Okay, in terms of resilient teens, so that's looking at mental health, mental resilience during adolescence. We looked at a number of things. Steph D'Souza's led a number of papers on ADHD. She has looked at trends in medication use. And then one thing I want to show you is working in data that we had on the before school check, look at those who met criteria for ADHD as best as we can tell at the before school check, and then who among those was getting treatment. And the best way, only way we really can measure treatment, unfortunately, is through pharmaceutical treatment, which is a primary treatment for ADHD, and to see if there's any differentials in those. Then Nick Bowden, for his PhD, has looked at a number of different things in relation to autism spectrum disorder. One is he looked to see how well that can be defined using IDI data. Could have a long discussion about the extent to which you can measure things well for some things and less well for other things using the integrated data infrastructure. He thinks, and I think as well, you've probably got slightly more than 50% of all ASD cases using the IDI, and others are just not picked up. He's also looked at the extent to which children with autism spectrum disorder are on lots of different medications. It's polypharmacy. I'm not going to show the justice system one anyway. No, I'm going to show the education one. The criminal justice system one was a paper showing essentially that those with ASD have a lower chance of having a criminal conviction, which goes against kind of some popular literature or scaremongering, you might say, about increasing rates of crimes amongst people with autism spectrum disorder. And then educational support, as I'll show, looking to the extent to which children with ASD are able to maintain in school or get suspended, and whether there's an intervening role of the educational support funding that schools get for children with ASD. And then there's this work that I've been working on recently with Anita van der Veer and Atta Forrest from the Ministry for Pacific Peoples, understanding mental health in Pacific communities. Actually, not just children, but adults as well, using the New Zealand Health Survey. And that's a bit of using the health survey within the IDI and a bit of using it outside the IDI for various reasons, which I'll get onto when I get to that slide. So, okay, so what this shows here is we've got children who met criteria for ADHD in the before school check, that's at age 4. So they got a referral for a behavioral problem, or they had high scores on the hyperactivity scale of the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, and the extent to which they were getting treatment thereafter. We followed them from whenever they had their before school checkup to the end of 2019, I think. And comparing Māori and non-Māori. And this is a paper that's just been accepted, actually, in the New Zealand Medical Journal. And what I think this shows is that for the same level of ADHD concerns, non-Māori children are more likely to get treatment, in this case treatment through medication, than Māori children, which I think is probably an access issue, mainly because it seems to be, if you look here, it seems to be driven by deprivation. So in the lower depth groups, there's absolutely no difference between Māori and non-Māori as to who gets subsequent medication. It's only really in the high deprivation groups and people who live outside the major urban areas where this is the case. Suggested to me it's probably an access issue and not just an issue of, well, there are other treatments for ADHD that Māori may be getting that isn't medication that we can't measure because it's not in the IDI. Okay, and this one by Nick Bowden and others looking at suspension rates for children with autism as a function of whether or not they receive the high needs education-based funding, which is available for children, but not all children get it, and it's given to the schools, actually. So what you see here is that overall, there's a high level of suspension for children with ASD in New Zealand, which you might imagine is because of problematic behaviours that may be shown by children with ASD that mean that schools decide they can't handle them and they get suspended. You see a vastly higher rate amongst children with autism compared to the rest of the population. However, if you compare the rate amongst children who receive funding, and there is a name, is it OARS funding? Yes, OARS funding, I think, who receive funding, you can see that the overall rate of suspension is about the same as those without autism, about the 2% mark. Whereas those that don't receive funding, about 3 times the rate. Who knows exactly what this means? It could be that the schools that get funding will lose the funding if they suspend the child. So there's a disincentive to suspend a child for the same level of behaviour. We have controlled for level of need here. So the level of the assessment of how many difficulties a child has. But in any case, what it does show that if that funding suggests, at least, if that funding were available, we may keep more children with ASD in schools. And then in terms of mental health in Pacific communities, which is stuff that I've been working on recently, we've looked at various trends. So, and this is from data outside the IDI, which people can download themselves, just from the Explorer, the data Explorer that the Ministry of Health released. I haven't yet got the information to calculate the error bars for these, but they're going to be quite wide because relatively small numbers for the Pacific population. But you can see overall there's been an increasing trend in childhood emotional behavioural problems, and it's mainly ADHD on the behavioural side and depression, anxiety on the emotional side. And also if you go to adults, increasing rates, big differences actually between the Pacific population and the total population, but I'll come to that very shortly. What this is a question of the form, New Zealand Health Survey. Has a doctor ever told you that you have X or your child has X? If instead you do a behavioural screen or a mental health screen, in this case the Kessler 10, I think is, rather than the Kessler 6, that they run there, so people are actually reporting their own symptoms. And then you can score that according to an algorithm as to who meets threshold for certain psychological distress symptoms, so kind of depression, anxiety. You can see it's flipped. So Pacific aren't being told by a doctor that they have problems, but if you run a symptom scale on them and you compare them to the population, they seem to have more. And this matches with research Steph D'Souza has done, also looking at depression, using the Growing Up data, depression in pregnancy. And if you look at the depression screen, you see far higher rates amongst Pacific and Māori and high dep. But if you look at who's getting treatment, you see the flip side. Okay, so again, this might be an access issue here. Okay, and just one other interesting thing here, just in terms of mental health in Pacific adults here, and one thing we're able to do with some groupings is look at, so this is just the Pacific communities here, not comparing to the total population. Look at the differential rates across different DHBs. And what you'd see there is, it looks like that if you ask them the question, or if you do ask them the question, has a doctor ever told you that you have depression? See slightly higher rates in the non-major centres, so outside of Auckland and Wellington, in the South Island and the rest of the North Island. But again, if you run that psychological stress, you see slightly different trends there. So I think it's important to understand what you're measuring here. Is it mental health per se, or is it treatment for mental health? And it's something that I bang on a bit about understanding mental health data in the IDI, actually. Okay, in terms of successful learning and literacy, they've done something fantastic, actually, in successful learning and literacy. They've got this thing called the Better Start Literacy Approach, which is a program that advances the skills essential for the development of reading among children in the first year of life, or first year of schooling, sorry. And so the teachers themselves go through this program of how to do this. And from what I can tell, it's kind of changes the way they teach and monitoring what's going on with the children. And it seems to have fantastic results. So Sri Gibb with Megan Gath, who used to be at Stats New Zealand, actually, and now at University of Canterbury, currently on maternity leave. She provided these data and Sri analysed them. And so what we've got here is looking at the blue, well, you've got here children who normally transitioning with age from 60 months, that's 5 years, up to age 6, 72 months. Their proficiency at this phoneme identity task, so phoneme is a sound and a word, gets better, as you expect, as they age. So in blue, we've got kids before they receive the Better Start Literacy Assessment. And what we're able to do is compare the kids who actually receive the assessment but are of the same age. So that's the red bar. You can see how much better or how more likely it is that children who have been through this program do better at this particular task. And do I show any more there? Yes, I do actually, yes. So you're seeing this, we've broken this down in any number of ways, but you see this basically the same trend where they're doing better if they've been through the program, if they're Māori, non-Māori, if they're Pacific, if they're low depth, if they're high depth, etc. So it's very cool, I think. And this is rolling out more widely across the rest of the country. Or they're in quite a bit of the country at the moment, but it's getting wider and wider and wider.
Can you just say a bit more about the program?
The short answer to that question is no, because I'm not a literacy expert. But you can, if you read that paper, which I'll show you at the end, actually, I've got a list of publications. I think I'll put it at the end. Gail Gillen's paper in 2022 does describe the program. And they're very happy about how it's gone, as am I. So whatever it's doing fantastically, but it's about the way the teachers are engaging with the children about their development of reading, from what I can tell. Yeah, it's funded by the Ministry. So Ministry of Education have got on board and funding it. So sorry, unfortunately, I'm not an education expert, but yeah, it is cool, I think. Okay, so in terms of what's coming up, so we're coming to the end of the Better Start funding, essentially. It ends in mid-2024, and we've kind of done the bits that we wanted to do, and there's a little bit of money left over, so that money is going to be put towards a couple of things. One is a largish project led by Boyd Swinburne, based in the Hawke's Bay, and amongst that, there's going to be some evaluation that we're going to do as part of Better Start, Big Data, sorry, of the Kāko program, which is a free school lunch program, and seeing what influence that has had. And the other thing that I just finished a proposal for, in fact, I was supposed to submit it today, I'll have to do this after this meeting, is to do some simulation modeling of the interventions that the various other teams have been doing. So they've been doing interventions, and it's like the Better Start Literacy Assessment, treating that as an intervention. There's interventions that have been run on changing weight trajectories, and also the Resilient Teens theme has invested in a lot of digital apps, that some of which are funded by the Ministry of Health, actually, to help teens who may be struggling with mental health. And so we're going to resurrect this thing, which I presented several years ago, or a couple of times, some years ago in the colloquium, where we've got the simulation model of children developing through life from birth to age 21, I think it was, where they, depending on what happens to them during life, they've got a stochastic probability of becoming something good or something bad in terms of outcome that we may be interested in. And we're going to augment this to include information from the interventions that the themes have been working on, to run some simulation modeling, and following on from that, saying, well, okay, if this, we know what this intervention costs, we can see what impacts it has, and we can work out what sort of value that is when you play it through life. So if you are more likely to get qualifications because you've got better literacy at age 5, for instance, that has lifelong effects that we can cost and relate that to the cost of doing this program, for instance. So that's what we're going to do there. So just a summary of what we got up to with this. We worked with those experts in those 3 areas to co-produce a number of publications, reports, and analyses, reports spelled correctly. And I think had a lot of fun doing it. Maybe you've detected this from this whole day. But one thing I really like about Compass is how we work on so many different areas where we know a bit about some things and we know a bit about the data, but we don't often turn people down saying, hey, would you like to work in this particular area? And I've had fun working on different areas such as education, which I don't know too much about. Primarily IDI work, but also starting to work with some Plunkett data. I think it's been fantastic actually working with the New Zealand Health Survey data again, working with data that's where they've actually asked questions of people rather than just looked at who's used services. And also the data collected in schools. That's what we've relied on. That's all primary data collection from the Better Start Literacy Approach people. So yes, so that's us. And we've got evaluation research planned and the simulation modeling proposed for 2023-24. And, oh, sorry, that's just our papers. I'll get you the Gail Gillen paper. In fact, might add it to this slide before it gets put on our website. Okay, any questions on that? That's collected. So they're in the schools and they collect information on how the child's doing. They're essentially collecting information, I believe, on whether they met. This wasn't the only thing they collected information about, but it's whether they met criteria for passing, and that was the percent they met criteria for passing.
What intervention is called phoneme?
No, the intervention itself, well, they don't like to use the word. Phoneme is a sound, pa or da, and this is phoneme. Yeah, I know this from psychology many years, but yeah, phoneme. Yeah, so it's phone me. I see you. Yes, phone me sounds like an intervention. Phoneme is a chunk of a word, sound of a chunk of a word, and they. Well, I think part of the approach is targeting the identification of phonemes. So sounds, if you understand sounds, you get a better chance of understanding the words.
Yes. I'm going to make a further inquiry about that at my grandson's primary school, because I've noticed a marked change in his reading ability from when he started a year ago to where his reading aptitude is now, and how he's advanced. He's been put in an advanced class because of the reading ability he's been able to attain.
What might be this program?
That's why I wanted to get that name correct.
Whether or not the school knows it by that name, I'm not sure, but yeah, we should. I mean, better just back to your question. Actually, Better Start puts on meetings for the public from time to time, and at meetings of the public, these sorts of things are talked about. If you want to find out more, I can keep people in touch with when there's wider meetings. We've got a closed meeting coming up shortly, but there's likely to be a wider meeting in the first half of the next year.